Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for coming. Yeah, wKLRW is a very complicated word. So KLR is a very complicated abbreviation, if you want. And I take the idea from Anstalk and just claim that many people in the audience know much more about those algebras than I do, so I will define them for you. And the whole idea is kind of this talk is that this algebra is really complicated, so we don't want to define it. So it's one of these definitions. If you see it for the first time, it's not helpful. If you see it for the 100th time, it's still not helpful at all. So I'm definitely not going to show it. And the point of this project, at least for me, which is joint work with Andrew, also University of Sydney, is to kind of, in the end, there will be some really complicated combinatorics involved. But what do you do if you really complicated combinatorics? You ask a machine to do it. So in the end, well, kind of some stage that eventually there will be some SageMath code that you can run actually online yourself in the SageMath calculator, and it will do all these funny calculations for you. And our main ingredient, which kind of is the big point how you can turn a complicated thing, in this case an algebra, into combinatorics, will be a crystal graph, and Sage already knows all crystal graphs, so you can just kind of feed it in, and it will give you some result, and kind of the structural properties of those algebras are reflected in combinatorial properties of crystals. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I don't know how you can find these algebras that are called KLR algebras, or even more fancy, this wKLRW algebra. But they are kind of very related to what people know here very well, and what people have worked on here very well as very much as well. And the real problem, the real problem with these algebras is that I can't even give you a definition in 20 minutes. So these are really complicated algebras. And particularly in the field of generality, I'm going to study them. And we started this project by just trying to question to find the basis for that algebra, which is reasonably nice. And then some kind of structural properties of those algebras, kind of try to write them down. Maybe it has some features that's quasi-hereditary or whatever. And it turns out to be just really hard. And I think we kind of found a cool trick how to do it, which is very combinatorial in nature and builds on the works of many people, including people in the audience. So that's essentially my slide about KLR algebras. So the whole point is that there's an even more complicated algebra, which I've certainly wanted to find. So this is wKLRW algebra, which is huge. It's a tremendously big algebra. And the one we are really interested in is an idempotent truncation. And we kind of put all properties along that idempotent truncation. So you might wonder why I want to like to study a little more complicated algebra. But sometimes, and actually it's the case here, it happens if you zoom out a little bit and you have a bigger picture of a bigger algebra. The algebra is bigger, more complicated to define, but actually easier to work with. And it helps us here a lot. And it kind of has all these ingredients coming together in a very nice way. And I hope at least to explain the flavor of what's going on today. So here's my thumbnail picture. It was also on my first slide, and we'll see it again. And I hope eventually, after my 30 minutes are over, you will have a good idea what's going on here. I don't assume that you understand this picture right away. So in a 60-minute talk, I should tell you actually about the whole story. There's a really beautiful diagram combinatorics, some really beautiful, in some sense, well, in the sense of 10 years or so. So due to Ben Webster and also the KLR people already, really nice, but I don't have time to explain it. And there's a new idea how to attack this problem. There's a new definition, which is not written at all. It goes back to the 50s, but kind of was a for 70 years, and now it turns out to be at least very helpful in the study of those algebras. And this is kind of a generalization of something that is very popular here in Sydney, kind of cellular algebras. And then there's this idea of connecting essentially the simple modules of your algebra to crystal graphs, which is again very well known. But it turns out that the combinatorial picture in this huge algebra, I'm not going to define, the one here on the top, is just so nice that I can just ask Sage to do it essentially. And Sage will tell me, or any algebra program, but we're working on Sage. Sage will tell me, oh, this has this property or this property, and then compute decomposition numbers and all the fun stuff you might want to do. But I only have 20 minutes, which I just changed. I thought I had 7 minutes. I just realized I have 20 minutes. So the 20-minute talk I already talked about the last, and that's already a lot of fun. So be prepared for a nice ride. So next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about crystals. So all of these pictures are created by Sage. So Sage knows everything, and you can just run it online and you'll create those funny type of graphs. So what is a crystal? I don't want to define what a crystal is. Same problem as before. All of you, or a lot of people in the audience, have really more and very better understanding what a crystal is than I do. And the definition is again a definition like I don't need to look at it. So I'm going with a very informal definition. But to have some background here, if you would ask me what is the major advantage of quantum algebra, so quantum algebra started roughly in the 80s of the last century, then, well, not theory comes to mind, the application Jones polynomial and stuff, but also crystals, so canonical bases and friends come to mind. So this is really a combinatorial shadow of a representation that will have a very nice, well, I have a slide, a next slide, which hopefully will help you to understand how these graphs work. And they will kind of list, well, representations of classical groups, V algebras or classical groups, are of course studied since the early days. Hammond Weil has a famous book on the classical groups, which essentially does everything about classical groups. But this was missed. This was missed until the 90s-ish, where Kashiwara and Lustig kind of independently came up with the same idea from kind of very different perspectives. And it's kind of very new information that you can read off from a quantum group, and that you can't really see in the group itself. It's kind of a very fun story. And I would like to think of it as like there's a quantum group, it acts on my representation, and then there's a way to specialize the quantum parameter to 0, which is the crystal limit, and it kind of tells you combinatorial shadow of a crystal. So the crystal is, in my talk, is just a directed graph with weighted edge and with colored edges. And the colors correspond to the nodes in the Lincoln diagram, so to the Chevalier generators. And all you see is, you can kind of ignore the labels of the vertices. All you see is there's a graph, and well, there are 4 or 5 vertices in this picture, and the action is 1, 2, 3, 4 from bottom to top. And that's the whole shadow of the vector representation of SL5. So 5 vertices, 5-dimensional, and the Chevalier generator is kind of on the leading terms, if you want, act on this representation, as demonstrated in this crystal. So the crystal captures the magic of the leading terms in those representations. So here's another example in type A1. So we should always double check everything with type A1. That's SL2. And ignore the labels, but maybe the top label, I should explain the top label, that's the highest rate. Here, number one is Sage's notation for the first finality rate. So this is just a combinatorial shadow of the forced symmetric power of C2 is SL2. And you all know the picture for SL2. It's just shapes next to from north to south instead of actually sometimes draw it from east to west. It's exactly the same. It's the action of F, and you don't even really need the action of E, which is kind of in the combinatorial crystal is really just the opposite. And the whole point is the crystal magic here is that you can kind of get rid in a very controlled way of all funny coefficients that ever appear or summons or whatever. So every edge, colored edge will just be from one vertex to another in each step. So there are no funny coefficients or anything. And there are many different interpretations of this graph, and Sage can do all of them for you. So here are kind of the main 3 flavors that you see. The second one, the first one is maybe more like Lustig would have done it. It's some kind of highest rate flavor, but it's a little bit stressing. And the second one is maybe more like Kashiwara would have done it in some kind of tableau type flavor. So we have a tableau associated to it, and it's just the the word tableau, and the actual generator changes numbers around the tableau. And the last one is, I have no idea, someone would have done it probably very sophisticated international radar, this kind of PBW interpretation. So the crystal itself is a crystal of the whole B is just an infinite type crystal, and you can cut out those PBW strings. And here you see an example how to label the vertices with the PBW strings. And I call these three flavors kind of the vanilla flavor because it's the standard flavor of Sage, and you can ask it to do something different. I hope these examples are clear. It's just SO2 just standing lying on its side, I guess. So going from north to south. Here are a few more examples. SO5 again, type A4, vector representation, the four generators, and the jump you just in a line again along the various vectors. So really, it's just, in this case, there's no symmetric power, it's really just a vector representation. So let's have a look at some more examples. So from left to right, SO5, SO9, SP8, SO8. So type A4, type B4, type C4, type D4. If you count vertices, you can convince yourself that this is exactly the vector representation in all those types. So here you should see nine vertices, SO9 acting on C to the 9. And this is how it looks like. So they all look very similar, but there are some funny things going on. So the combinatorics of the loop itself will change the crystal. Like in type D, was this little already face in the middle of the graph. So these are, if you like the notion, the crystals for number one in classical types that I just picked rank 4. I mean, this is generalized. So rank N is always a line. Is exactly that pattern. So type B counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and it counts backwards 3, 4, 2, 1. And type C it counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, and so on. There's a huge, you just ask Sage about it. You can tell them all of these graphs, and the point is that kind of all of these kind of make sense for various, depending on your setting. I only showed you finite types. Some of them make sense in infinite types as well. Some of them are restricted to finite types. And they all are kind of a different flavor combinatorially. And all of these flavors are reflected in the KLR combinatorics, where the KLR combinatorics reflects those flavors in a very, very nice way. So for example, if you work with finite types, and you always have a PBW theorem, so you always have the PBW interpretation of a crystal, and that reflects some properties of finite type KLR algebras, actually. So the main idea is that you have two sides, and they look quite different if you look at them at first glance, but if you stare at them a little bit more, it's just kind of rearranged, and they actually are the same in a certain sense. So one side is crystals, like this very great idea coming up in the 90s of the last century, and the other side was very complicated algebras, the KLR algebras that came about 15 years ago. And some people call them the most important new class of algebras of the new millennium, which might be true or not, but certainly they are very complicated, and it turns out, at least in this picture, that they have exactly the combinatorics of the crystal kind of reflected in a slightly messed up way. So you kind of need to still identify how the two sides connect together. And let me, at least in the remaining 6 minutes, give you a flavor of how that works. And to make that precise is the whole point of the project, or at least the mathematical point of the project. The real point of the project is that there eventually will be, as I said, some GitHub, and you can run all of this online yourself. So if you have questions about those algebras, and there will be some crystal combinatorics running in the background, and it will spit out the result, whatever. The number is 5, or the answer is 5, or whatever it is. I think that's a pretty cool idea. And obviously having someone like Andrew is fantastic as a co-author is really helpful. So Andrew has done all the Sage computations. Mostly. Okay, let's stay at some crystals, and then we go to KLR again. They can be essentially arbitrarily complicated. So here are a different one for the 2-1 partition in type SL3, so type A2. Again, the 3 flavors of the crystal. Here's the PBW crystal. Sage can generate the PBW crystal for you as well, which is an infinite crystal that kind of spits out the PBW basis elements as you go along the crystal, like the Q0 version of those PBW elements. you can do all the fancy stuff. So if you have an E8 crystal, it's really huge and really complicated. And kind of the whole point is that those little faces that you see all over the place correspond to relations in the KLR algebra. That's how you should read it. So for type E8, you have zillions of those funny faces. Turns out that they appear in a very controlled way, and they're determined by the relations in the KLR algebra and vice versa, the relations in the KLR algebra. Determined by the face combinatorics of the crystal in a very precise way. Okay, in the remaining probably 5 minutes or ish, I would like to play this procedure game. So I'm not defining the algebra, but I'm going to show you how the algorithm works that creates objective models for that algebra. And the main idea is a string placing game, which I'm going to explain. It's essentially, there's a certain configuration. You can place strings and you place them in a row, string 1, string 2, whatever. And it's a certain configuration which gives a rich tone, and all of the others are kind of crappy. And how to find the good ones is kind of a crucial question. So, as you can see in my little picture here, well, someone has done it eventually for the guitar, I guess. But for KLR, the best trick is the crystal. The crystal determines for you a nice diagram, and the nice diagram has all the properties you want it to be. It kind of plays the role of the bit in a cellular algebra structure, and then kind of classifies for you center modules and projective modules and all that fun stuff, and determines all of the properties of the KLR algebra. So I would like to play this string game with you without giving you too many details because I only have 3 minutes left. The only thing we need to know about these algebras, they are diagram algebras, and they have 3 types of strings. They have those strings, they have ghost strings, so kind of dotted strings, and they have a red string. The red string corresponds to the highest rate in the representation, and the others kind of play the role of jumping around in the crystal, which I will make precise in a second. Not going to give you a more detailed definition, but essentially, there's those pictures, you can stack them, and that's your algebra. And the whole point of the algebra is that it is a diagram algebra, string algebra, so it's Reidemeister type relations, but the quiver or associated type, whether it be SO2 or SO1200, the precise relations depend on the crystal. Sorry, not on the crystal, on the underlying type, on the underlying quiver. And the whole point is that on the quiver itself, there will be Reidemeister relations or there won't be Reidemeister relations, or kind of certain deformations of Reidemeister relations. In particular, if you think about this relation here, and this relation essentially says if you cut it in the middle, you have 2 strings, and you can't only the strings, they all don't matter, because you have this relation that you can always apply. And in KLR, that's not quite true. It's only true sometimes. In particular, certain strings get stuck whenever this relation doesn't meet, and pair of strings next to one another, and you can't play the trick anymore, so you're not really in order now. So you can order strings in the KLR algebra because of the absence of this relation. And which relation is absent depends on the quiver, and this is how the magic of the KLR algebra comes into the game. So the absence of those relations determines the algebra and then connects it to all the clarification fun stuff that it is supposed to do. And we took that as an inspiration to define our little game. And the game itself is very easy. It works as follows. I just zoom in a little bit and we explain it. I just explained it here on my crystal. So here's a crystal, and you can see already faces, and this is type B4. And I claim every path in this crystal. So here, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. And you can read here correspond to an idempotent diagram, but just when you have your highest state, it's given by a red string, you place a 2 string next to it, and it's stuck behind the other 2 string because the Reidemeister 2 relation is not present here. And then you can keep on going, or you stuck the string somewhere such that it gets blocked because you don't have a Reidemeister 2 relation. And this process is algorithmic, so Sage can do it. So those diagrams are also created by Sage. And these diagrams play the main role. So we have a very well-defined procedure to place strings according to walking around in the crystal. So the red string corresponds to the highest rate, and the other strings correspond to the path in the crystal. And eventually we show something like that. For all finite types, KLR algebras are the cyclotomic algebras, of course, elementary, cellular, and all that fun stuff. And we rely essentially just by the PDW theorem for the crystal, which then brings over abstract properties to the KLR combinatorics. And the whole point is that, okay, we don't do it for finite types because that's very tough for me, but essentially this is a general framework, so you can have abstract properties of the crystal, combinatorial properties of the crystal correspond one-to-one to abstract properties of the KLR algebra, which I hope to eventually prove in my life. But not today anymore because I'm out of time. So let me just finish with this slide. Yeah. So that was my string playing game, which was my thumbnail. So I have my own first slide as a slide, which makes me very happy. Thank you very much.